G'day, humans! Welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas, and what a treat, what a delight. Dissecting dangerous ideas, arguing for dangerous ideas, wrestling with dangerous ideas has been the life's work of today's guest, the one and only Andrew Sullivan. He was one of the most famous and influential people arguing for gay marriage long before it was popular. He was the first person to publish a major article about it, to write a major American article about it. That was back in 1989. He wrote the book on it in 1995 that was entitled Virtually Normal. And when the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in the United States in 2013, many intellectuals and political journalists looked at Andrew Sullivan and anointed him the most influential political writer of his generation. He was born and raised in the UK. He went to Oxford University, then he moved to America and got his PhD in politics at Harvard University. And as a gay, British, Catholic conservative in America, he began to dominate cultural debates. You would see him on TV all the time, on Bill Maher's show. You would read him in print in London's Daily Telegraph or the Sunday Times or the Atlantic Magazine or Time Magazine or the New York Times Magazine or New York Magazine, arguing about everything from AIDS to the Iraq War to Barack Obama's candidacy. Andrew also pioneered online journalism as one of the first superstar bloggers. He created the online blog The Daily Dish in the year 2000. And around that time, a little fetus by the name of Josh Sepps became aware of Andrew's blog and subsequently of the book that he had written back in 1995, Virtually Normal. And it blew the top of my head off. Here was this strange, articulate, liberal-minded, egalitarian, universalist, sort of 19th century Catholic Englishman arguing, convincing not just America as a whole, but American conservatives specifically that gay people should be able to get married. We talk about that fight, the opposition to gay marriage from gays themselves in the 80s and 90s, the transgender culture wars of the 2020s, the experience of living through HIV and AIDS. Andrew is HIV positive himself, has been since the mid-90s. We talk about the LGBTQIA plus community, Andrew's college life in Ronald Reagan's America, and how he won over a conservative country to what was then a radical gay agenda, and how liberals might just be able to do it again. I hope you enjoy as much as I did the one, the only, Andrew Sullivan.
One day I'm going to write an autobiography and it's going to be called Phlegm, a story. It's a memoir. Because I've drowned in phlegm since I was a little kid. I have the worst lungs. All they do is give me phlegm.
Oh, my goodness. Does the sea air help?
The phlegm.
My grandmother would have said the sea air, the ozone from the ocean helps.
No, you need deserts, basically.
Yeah,
so
right.
If you want to cut down on the phlegm, you don't want to go to a place that's full of mold spores, rotting wood, and currently a big blast of tree cum everywhere. It's like it's an arboreal bukkake out there right now.
What is it? Is it sap or what? What's
the pollen?
Oh, the pollen, right. Oh, yeah, I wouldn't be good with that.
Yeah, no, it gets everywhere and everything. And
well, if you want desert, then you can come to Australia and walk from Sydney to Perth. We've got a lot.
Yes,
there's like thousands of miles of nothing. Apart from, well, I shouldn't say nothing. The Indigenous elders would shit on me if I said nothing.
Oh, yes.
It's a timeless, bounty, but there's no jack in the box.
When I was about 12 years old, I watched Walkabout on TV, which is my introduction to Australia, I guess.
Don't even know it.
Oh, come on.
Sorry.
It's a very famous movie in the 70s called Walkabout with Jenny Agutter and this Aborigine kid, and it's you should look it up. Walkabout.
All right.
It's a big Australian movie.
I mean, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it was before I was alive. See, you've got the fuck off energy now, doesn't it?
1971. Here it goes.
Great. I was in college.
We're not. Oh, fuck you.
Welcome back to Andrew Sullivan Scrolls IMDb.
I'm just trying trying to prove I didn't make that up.
Looking for small Australian movies from the 1970s.
It was quite life-changing for a young man because there was nudity, which you didn't really see. There were boobies, which of course didn't do a huge amount for me, but it was stirring somehow. It was stirring in the loins for a 12-year-old somehow. Wasn't there like a whole thing about like young kids before pornography would get National Geographic magazines so that they could see the pendulous breasts of native women? Well, not me.
Furiously masturbate over like, African tribes people?
No, I used to wait for the Sunday. Every now and again you get a Sunday magazine and they'd have maybe some sexy guys in it. And occasionally they would do fashion spreads and so on. I remember this one fashion spread happened of boxer shorts, and they had lots of boxes in boxer shorts. That was
I get the pun. Very clever.
But I was bowled over by this. I couldn't believe. So I used to wait till the thing had gone out, because they would pile them up about 4 weeks at a time. And when it was about to be trashed, I would slip it out and cut them out. And
you would slip it out. Let's not roll with the puns on slipping it out.
I had a little comic book of all these hot men. There it was. That was what I was doing when I was 12 or 13.
What's the Sunday magazine that would have these pseudo-pornographic?
It was just a fashion spread.
Oh,
it was
right.
fashion spread. That's all it was.
Right.
It was a Sunday Times.
In a newspaper.
Sunday Times.
Yeah,
yes.
right. Yeah, yeah.
What
was it?
You made do.
Yeah, well, you did what you had to, didn't you?
You did.
I mean, I imagine. Well, so talk to me first about just after that, when you got to the States and when you were like banging around in the 80s. I'm interested in this period and what that was like. Like, I mean, what was it like being at Harvard in the 80s?
Well, I arrived in America at a very weird moment. I arrived just after the LA Olympics and just before the Reagan re-election. And so America was about to come, basically. It was having this
this conversation's going from worst to bad to terrible to offensive.
It was super exciting.
Going to put the adult content label on this episode.
It was that people were nationally orgasmic. It was this was Ferris Bueller's Day Off period. Yeah. This was Reagan running for re-election. This was Morning in America time. The place it's very hard to explain. It was very helpful to understand coming here, to feel this energy. I remember beforehand, before I came to America, I never expected to stay because I had very snooty English attitudes towards the place. Stupid, snooty English attitudes toward the place. But when I got here, the excitement was palpable. I wore a Reagan 80 button in my English high school. So that's how, out there I was, which, believe it or not, this pissed off Keir Starmer, who was in my own class. And
which was presumably the point.
It was part of the point, yes. I loved this new wave of individualism, of anti-collectivism, of standing up to the communists once and for all, restoration and some kinds of respect for religious belief and religious life. I mean, it was, and a vindication of the free market. These were heady times if you were a young right-winger, especially if you were a very lonely young right-winger in your own class, in your own educational stratum. And so you kind of went out on a limb in the late 70s, early 80s with Thatcher and Reagan. Everybody hated you in your peer group.
Again,
and then it turned out they were awesome. They really were. I was spoiled in a way. They were really among the most effective politicians of my lifetime, and I was on their side. So it was really amazing. And that whole ride through the 80s, through the fall of the wall in 89, and then the wonderful 90s, which was what we'd all been hoping could happen once we got past the Cold War. That was a very exhilarating time to be thinking and alive as a sort of right of center person in the elite.
And how did your social groups intersect? Like, we have this image of 1970s gay life in places like New York being this very underground and kind of debaucherous and almost radical, pre-HIV place of hedonism, this subterranean universe. But then you're talking about quite a buttoned up Reagan era kind of elite conservative milieu. Where were you?
Well, I was at Harvard, so
a few miles up the road.
And so, it was Harvard. Liberals were dominant. You were a weirdo because of this. But nonetheless, I was having a ball. I wasn't out really at that point. I certainly had never had any interaction with another dude. It took me a couple more years. No, maybe not quite that long, but a little while before I screwed up the courage, as it were, to try that out. And America, of course, was a fantastic place to do that because it was the equivalent of coming from a small town to a big city in a way. No one knew who you were really. So all that stuff was left behind. And I had already developed, whether I liked it or not, a kind of profile in England. You do. I mean, if you went to Oxford as I did and you were president of the union as I was, and in the theater there and in the social world there and in the intellectual world there, you already marked out to be a member of the British elite in a way. And I was one of the classic ones who was came from a family with no college education, but ambitious. And this was how they bought you off. They gave you this amazingly Elysian, beautiful time in these beautiful buildings in this dreamy town. And then Harvard struck me as a little bit of a knockoff of all that, but I liked it nonetheless. So it wasn't
you saying that you weren't
reading Aristotle and Plato and teaching political theory to undergraduates and reading history and doing what I liked. So it really wasn't anything much than that.
So you weren't fooling around with guys in college. You were
no.
You were basically celibate. And how did that?
Totally celibate.
How did you think about gayness? I mean, because it was pretty soon after that you were writing, public pieces about gay marriage and the foundational book, and like one of the first big pieces in the late 80s about arguing for this thing that at the time sounded completely harebrained to everybody. At a time when even gay sex was still illegal in a lot of states, including in Australia. And so what's the trajectory from being a celibate, closeted, like not even part of the community to like the flame-carrying champion?
Well, there's a personal story in a way as well as a sort of political one.
What's the personal one?
The personal one is that, one day I go to a party where I'm introduced to this guy who's a airline pilot, actually. And
naturally.
A really charming dude. And I say, well, let's go for a date. A date. Okay. So I went on a date with this guy. Before I went on the date, I went to confession. I did. And I sat down and I said, forgive me, Father, for I'm about to sin. I want to be honest with you. I'm pretty sure I'm attracted to this person. I don't know what's going to happen on our date, but I don't feel I'm doing anything wrong as such. And I just want to get it out there, because I know what I'm not supposed to do. I don't know what I'm going to do.
And the priest said, what are you doing tomorrow night? Because
the priest, who was wonderful actually, and was gay and had a boyfriend at the time, I didn't know, but I subsequently found out, said, well, I can't tell you, that you can, commit a sin, but I would encourage you to come back here next week and we'll keep the conversation going, the dialogue going about you being a young man in the church. And it was very important for me to kind of be upfront with the church on this from the get-go. I wasn't going to run from it. And then it happened, and I mean, nothing happened. I mean, I didn't really have what you might think of as sex for a couple more years, but I I was amazed that how different my life felt as soon as I realized that everything would make more sense this way. And the exhilaration and the relief of coming out of a very, very strict, I guess the word repressed might be one word for it, but I didn't feel that repressed, but I was definitely expressing myself in ways that I can now see were partly a function of repressing something inside myself. And as soon as that happened, honestly, it's very simple. As soon as I realized there's nothing wrong with this, in fact, this is kind of amazing, that was it. I came out to everyone almost immediately. I told my friends. I told the woman I was sort of dating. An
important person to advise.
It was important, yes. And she was wonderful about it. And so that was that. And that was really what happened. I went on, did my work, and I went on a few days. I went out to this local disco in Cambridge, which is really, really fun. And
does it still exist?
I think it does, actually. It's called Campus Man Ray. It's in Central Square. And Friday nights were a real excitement. But I was also big into theater, actually. I played Hamlet at Harvard, and I played Alan in Equus, and I directed my own version of Four Quartets by Eliot. I was in the Merchant of Venice on the main stage in the American Playhouse. And that's what I had been at Oxford too. I'd really been known as an actor and debater rather than as a thinker or writer.
What was the most challenging thing about playing Hamlet?
The part itself. It's you wrestle with it, and you're like, who is this person? And shockingly, the text doesn't really help you. His actual character, is strangely elusive.
Well, that's the
there's
point.
There's nothing
to
hang on to. I know. There's nothing to hang on to as an actor. You realize that he's sort of an impersonation of pure thought. And so actually to act that was a real challenge, because some of the scenes don't make a huge amount of emotional sense, actually, I don't think I certainly don't think I mastered it, but I had a good go at it. And we did the uncut. So the other challenging thing was actually remembering it all. It's the largest part in Shakespeare.
Had you seen, I assume you'd seen the Olivier film.
No, I hadn't.
No. Okay, good. Because that would have been impossible to shake. It's such a distinctive performance of
which is why
Hamlet.
I wouldn't wanted to have seen it. And we actually did it. It was funny. This dates it. The theme music was Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And the advertising campaign on the campus was called Frankie Says Relax. And no, Hamlet Says Relax. Sorry, forgive me. And it was to all modern dress and done in a sort of weird amphitheater with bleachers either side. It was fun, really fun. And
at this time, are you writing sort of political and cultural stuff as well, or you're just
no? I'm writing my papers. I wanted to take time out. And this sounds naive, but it's genuine too. I wanted to figure out what I thought about the world. I'd sort of emerged rather overly and formed really as a young person. I was super precocious. Was way too ahead of my skis, really. I thought I knew everything, but I hadn't experienced anything. So it was I had the sort of Buttigieg syndrome, as it were. I looked like a human being but I hadn't actually been a human being.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to say, I'm going to read all of it. I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to start with, Plato. I'm going to do the entire thing. And I did. And I loved it. And it was an incredibly fruitful experience, the whole thing at Harvard. I'm very, very lucky, and I have nothing. And with Harvey Mansfield, who was my supervisor, this is another joy of it. I would spend every Friday, I'd go to his place, his offices, and we would spend an hour reading Plato's Republic. and we got through in 2 years. We got to book 6. And just to be able to sit there with one of the great scholars and weigh the words of this person who lived and wrote, 2,500 years ago, longer than that, was just an amazing thing.
Mm.
And I wanted to write, and I had and I've been an intern at the Daily Telegraph in London the summer before I came to America. And so I applied in the summers for internships in places. And I spent the first summer, however, traveling the States with a friend of mine. And we went from Miami to San Diego, up to Seattle, back to Boston. We did the whole thing. Yeah, it was amazing. And
did you go through
then
the
I
Deep
was
South?
working on, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I loved the South. It was intense and beautiful and exotic to me. And I fell in love with certain parts of America. I fell in love with Motel 6s. I fell in love with Denny's. Have you ever been to Denny's?
Yep, I
fell
have.
in love with the American diner. It's amazing food. And I went with a friend of mine.
86-page long menu that has like every single kind of type of, chicken schnitzel with like pasta on the side, a bazillion different things. How can you have like a roast chicken and also a pork loin? Like, what are they doing out there? Yeah.
And it'll all be served by a number of 50-something-year-old old ladies who had been there for 25 years and took no shit from anyone and were incredibly efficient at what they did. And for an Englishman, they kept refilling my coffee, which I know in 1985-6, for an English person, that was kind of a shock. The sheer land of plenty. If
they don't actually have a cigarette in their mouth while they're pouring your coffee, they're about to.
It's a damn shame if that's the case. If they have it hanging out of their mouth as they give it to you. I hadn't been to a restaurant until I went to college. I mean, the idea we would go out to a restaurant. I mean, we didn't have the money. It was a ridiculous expense. But this is relatively cheap, and I had a little stipend. It was awesome.
This is a time when, if it's 85, 86, then AIDS is just beginning to ravage America as well, right? It's starting to make headlines. And
George Michael's Freedom was on the radio.
Right, right. And part of the response from gay people and from gay intellectuals was to split into a couple of possible camps, one of which is this is the time to double down on the fundamentally radical vision of gayness, that sexuality should be a catalyst for an overhaul of culture and a demolition of staid, conservative, patriarchal traditions. And then the other side, of which you were one of the most prominent advocates, was actually this is an opportunity to bring us into the fold of small c conservative cultural values.
Yeah, well, for me, it proved the ghetto was not viable. AIDS did. Because we needed the world. We couldn't do this ourselves. We needed the science. We needed the research. We needed the drugs. We needed the contacts. We needed to reach the straight people to persuade them. This was proof positive that shutting yourself off in a tiny little radical enclave was fine unless shit happens, and you have to realize you live in a broader society, and you have to come to terms with how you integrate in that broader society. And of course, the first thing was preventing death. I mean, that was the first thing. Before you got to politics, it was like, first of all, how do we stop this? Secondly, if we get it, how do we help each other? And I was not, back then, in the 80s, people forget, the 80s were not when AIDS was really, really, really happening. In the 90s were when AIDS happened. The deaths peaked in 95. So although it was happening and it was terrifying and people were scared, it didn't really become this unbelievable onslaught of sickness and death until the 90s really got going. And then it just almost doubled every year. It was just insane. And so I saw this from the corner of my eye, as it were. I wasn't really that sexually active. When I was in Boston during my PhD, I I definitely got in touch with a lot of local gay groups. I wanted to start organizing the gay right then, because there was actually a first elected young gay Republican in Boston under Bill Weld, a man called Mike Duffy I knew back then. This is 1989. Anyway, long story short, I was out. I was feeling my way in the world. I was a grown-up finally. And I did an internship at the New Republic. And I had a great time. I came back for a visit. Around the editorial meeting, there was a conversation about domestic partnership and AIDS. And they said, well, they looked at me suddenly as if I was supposed to have an opinion. They all kind of knew I was gay, but I hadn't really written or said anything about it at that point. Certainly not to many straight people. And I'm like, well, I don't see why we can't just get married. Why isn't that the obvious conservative position? You want people to commit to each other. You want them to exercise responsibility. You want them to be part of their own families. It would also be an incredible psychological healing process for us to be able to participate in the critical institution and ceremony of family life, which we had been excluded from. So I found myself saying this sort of in an argument, and Kinsley looked at me and he said, "You should write that." And in fact, you should write that now while you're still not scared. You're not too scared to write it. So I'm like, oh, whatever, Michael, I got to go. So he said, no, do it. So I went back. He bugged me. I was in Boston. It bugged me. So I just wrote this out, just rather briefly. He sent it back with some smart, as usual, edits. I was like, okay. And I realized this means I'm kind of out to the world, even though I didn't say I'm out gay in it. I didn't.
Only a gay person would have written such an article.
At that point, no straight people ever wrote about anything gay. So if you wrote about it, you were suddenly the gay person.
Well, especially not as an idea as radical as that. I mean, for young listeners, it's probably hard to imagine how quickly things have changed. But even when I was, in school in the late 90s, it was when it was a perfectly acceptable thing to be gay in big progressive cities like the one that I lived in. But it was still weird, fringe, different. And the idea of it being, of something like marriage being on the table was not in our universe until I read your book in the early 2000s and I realized that there was actually a case for it and that it could actually happen at some point in my lifetime. But the idea that it would happen within a decade was fanciful.
Yeah. And I personally didn't think it would happen in my lifetime. I mean, I thought it was an interesting thought experiment. And as I sort of voiced it, I realized, why hasn't this been raised before? I would say this when I went out and give some talks about this. I began to give some talks and I would say things like, people always ask me, why are you bringing this up? And I'm like, well, the real question is, why did we never have the self-esteem to raise it before? Why did we always think we were unworthy of it? That's what this is about. This should have been, it's the most salient institution to an emotional experience of love and relationship. That's it. That's how we measure it. That's how we define it. That's how we think of it. And we somehow deep down thought, we're not worthy of this. We shouldn't have this. We can't. And then we'd made ourselves feel better about this by saying, well, we don't want it anyway. It's all a bunch of patriarchal, heterosexist bullshit. And again, people find this hard to believe, but I'll tell you the truth is that in the first, maybe 10 years, the strongest opposition came from gays. My book, Virtue Normal, was picketed by the lesbian Avengers. I was targeted as a right-wing fascist. It was regarded as a betrayal of homosexuality to be in favor of this because articulate what the most generous interpretation of their perspective would be. That we were buying into an oppressive, violent, patriarchal institution that had excluded us, and we were thereby sort of accepting and going over to the enemy.
And you were groveling for what they've created instead of building your own future.
Yes. To which my point was, well, if you want to do that, fine. You can do whatever you want with your life. You already can. And that was an interesting moment. I mean, in 95, when the Virtue Normal came out, and I was in London, actually, I did an event there, and they wouldn't let you just give your own speech about gay marriage. That was too much. They always had to have someone to push the other position. This is in the gay world. They had to have another gay person to tell the world that they didn't believe it. The condescension was unbelievable. Who is this kid, this creep, this whoever? We did a little thing, and then afterwards there was Q&A, and someone stood up, and it was Peter Tatchell. I don't know whether you know who Peter Tatchell is. He was a legend, the biggest gay rights person in the UK at that point, and still is a pretty prominent activist there. And he said, I just want you to know that here in England, we despise marriage, we reject marriage as a patriarchal institution that we thoroughly disown. And it was a huge round of applause. And then it was quiet, and they waited for me to respond. And I said, well, look, let me just say this. With all due respect, Peter, you don't reject marriage because you can't reject marriage because marriage has never been offered to you. I'm fighting for the right for you to reject it. And the place then went very silent. And then I felt this wave of applause begin, and you realize, oh, I'm not trying to tell people you need to all get back into your Victorian outfits or anything. I am arguing that we have a choice. We should be able to choose like every straight person does. Do I want to live my life with a formal commitment to another person forever or not? You don't have to. And many gays won't, I'm sure. And fine. It's up to you. I'm not a moralizer here, but I do think it would be humanizing for us. I do think it would be good for us to have some kind of idea of where our sex and love will end up, have some future for ourselves as in our heads. And I do think that it would help us develop a stronger internal society that could resist, that could be more immune to things like AIDS and HIV, and also would heal our families. And is a way in which we can explain to straight people that we're human like them. In fact, instead of spending our lives reminding them why we're different than them, why we're queer, why we're weird, we might at the same time recognize that we have a lot in common with them. We grew up with them. We are part of their families. We don't have our own we're born into straight families. And we are humans. And we love as well as get horny. And the two mix up. And we've understood as humans for a very long time that this coupling in responsibility and exclusivity is a ennobling and worthwhile thing. And I'm sick of having it demeaned in some way.
What's so interesting, Andrew, about that moment that you're articulating, that riposte, is that it universalizes the question, and it appeals to foundational basic beliefs that people have about freedom and liberty, basic instincts, right? Like what you're doing is you're basically sort of flipping the script and saying, yes, you're looking at it this way, but here's a way that I can present it to you, which is tethered to actually deeper values that we all share that really have nothing to do with gayness or not gayness or marriage or not marriage, that have to do with the human instinct for self-aspiration, for self-determination, for control of one's destiny and so on, and to be able to make the choices that you want to make. And what's striking about that is that we've lost on the left so much of that art of persuasion, right? We've lost the ability to tether our ideals to deeper, widespread, universalist aspirations that middle America and middle Australia and middle Britain hold. And we've become increasingly, I suppose, shrill and isolated in the way that we try to articulate our vision for ourselves, for our group and our rights and it's like, what's the lesson? G'day, humans! Well, if you've listened to this much of the episode, then you must enjoy it, presumably, unless you're just listening for masochistic reasons. So you should listen to the rest of it. And the way you do that is by subscribing to the premium feed, where you not only get to hear the rest of this delightful conversation, and trust me, it gets better than what you just heard, but you also get to hear no ads, 0 ads. And previously, up until now, you had to go to the old Substack to do that and follow me on Substack and add one more platform to your life if you're not already on Substack. But here's the thing. We are now on Apple Premium Podcast as well. So with one click, Apple will just subscribe you up to the premium feed. You'll be able to listen to the rest of this conversation right now. So open up your Apple Podcasts, click the old Pay Old Zepsy button. That's probably what it's called, Pay Old Zepsy. And you click the button and then you no longer have to be a free rider. You can feel like you're contributing to the mission of this show, which is really what we're all here for. Better conversations, a freer, more freewheeling attitude towards the things that we can talk about, a way to steelman our opponents and to take the most gracious approach towards disagreement. That is what you're voting for when you vote for Uncomfortable Conversations by going into your Apple Podcasts and clicking subscribe. I love you. If you don't do that, that's fine. I'll see you the next free episode, I guess. Take care.